Congress and take questions from you as well. Before we begin, I want to emphasize I look forward to holding an in-person town forums in the month of April and throughout the year to remain in constant dialogue with people who proudly represent that I represent in Congress. I want to make it perfectly clear that I am always welcoming, and I always want to hear what you have to say and stay connected to you and to the district. And so I wish we were in front of each other, but we are in the midst of our budget cycle. We are in the midst of challenging times, and we're in the midst of unprecedented times. And with that said, I wish I could be with you, and we will be in April. And I thank you all for attending this virtual community forum. So first, let me share with you a few updates on my actions and what I have been doing to advocate for Northwest Indiana. And then I look forward to addressing the questions and concerns that you have submitted. If I don't address your specific questions during the conversation, now I will be happy to get back to you in writing and also to be able to communicate with you so you can get in touch with our office and we get back to you. So first, I want to share that I am thrilled in the 119th Congress to be a member of the House Appropriations Committee. This committee allows us to have a seat at the table within Northwest Indiana to understand where all the taxpayer dollars go. I have sought to be on this committee since my first day as a member of Congress, and I believe that this committee, where real work gets done in a bipartisan manner to support our workers, our economy, and our national security, Indiana's 1st Congressional District has a rich history of representation on this committee, and I believe it's a place that you can help people. And I look forward to building on their success and working with all of my congressional colleagues to provide clarity where there is confusion and promote calmness where there is chaos. At the outset, I want to acknowledge that I understand that there is fear and anxiety and anger with the news coming out of Washington, D.C. And there are some questions on the actions of executive orders of the new administration. I would highlight that the House Appropriations Committee ultimately determines how our nation's investment of our tax dollars will be in front and center in assessing the administration's budget proposals and conducting congressional oversight on how those monies are spent. I remain very disappointed that the recent actions and the executive orders are causing unnecessary harm and threatening established governmental programs and projects in Northwest Indiana that impact real people's lives and real benefits for individuals, businesses, nonprofits, workers, veterans, supporters, and our seniors. I'm staying as current as possible on these reckless actions and the impact they have in Northwest Indiana and the 1st Congressional District in our state and our nation. I will continue to encourage the administration to be forward-looking and to place such proposals in the upcoming budget request, and then let Congress and the House Appropriations Committee perform our constitutional duties to assess such proposals and also have a checks and balances system. I want to begin with the congressional update. This week, the House is in session, so I am in Washington, D.C. to vote and participate in the committee hearings. This Congress, I have been selected to serve on the House Appropriations Committee, which is another word for government funding, again, and this committee is responsible for deciding how much federal funding goes to government programs that Americans rely on. I look forward to defining our nation's values and priorities throughout the federal funding process and improving government services to make a positive difference in the lives of individuals and families in our region. I serve on the 2 subcommittees with the House Appropriations Committee. The first subcommittee is on Energy and Water Development, and that subcommittee, and also the subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, and Science. These subcommittees are responsible for funding federal programs under the Department of Energy and the Department of Commerce, Department of Justice, and most recently, I joined the subcommittee on Energy and Water Development for an oversight hearing on the state of civil works programs, where I spoke with members of the Army Corps of Engineers about their invaluable contributions to our region, our state, and our nation. As we look ahead in the appropriations process, the deadline to fund the government is approaching on March 14th. Today, we are operating under a continuing resolution, meaning funding levels are continuing at prior year levels. Unfortunately, this creates uncertainty. This means that we have not updated funding amounts or policy direction for federal programs, which hinders our ability to address the pressing issues facing both our national security and our economy. I regret that Congress has not yet completed our appropriations work for the fiscal year that began nearly 5 months ago at the beginning of October. I am working hard to reach across the aisle and work with all of my colleagues in Congress and on the Appropriations Committee to come up with bipartisan solutions to keep the government open and funded. I look forward to providing an update on my work on the Appropriations Committee and our efforts to keep the government open and funded in the coming days. Recently, when the House is out of session, I was home in Northwest Indiana where I do some of my best work and also am present in our community and meet with local leaders and organizations to discuss the issues impacting our region. I recently toured facilities and met children and employees and parents at the St. Mark Early Learning Center in Gary to discuss the importance of federally funded Head Start programs. Last month, I visited the new Ivy Tech campus in East Chicago to see students in action and hear from scholarship recipients who shared their stories. I also went to Opportunity Enterprises in Valparaiso to meet with staff and employees and discuss the invaluable service they offer our region. In Hobart, I stopped by the fabrication completion at Boilermakers Local 374 to show my support for the high school students who were competing. I met with Northwest Indiana parents whose sons and daughters were in a welding competition to be able to prove themselves as worthy Boilermakers for our future endeavors. I also met with the Indiana Food Service directors to discuss the importance of child nutrition and making sure our kids are fed healthy meals at school so they can learn and succeed. I touched base with local elected officials to hear their concerns and to see how I can help. I also met with constituents in our Maryville office to hear their concerns, answer their questions, and discuss pressing issues. I will continue to be present in our community to make sure that you know you are heard, to stay connected, and also to listen. One of my top priorities on the Appropriations Committee will be continuing support for the strength of the Northwest Indiana steel and manufacturing industries and our incredible members of organized labor. That is why I specifically selected to serve on the subcommittee for Commerce, Justice, and Science, which is responsible for providing funds and oversight for the International Trade Commission, known as the ITC. I've testified before the International Trade Commission on multiple occasions as a representative for Indiana's 1st Congressional District, and believe that this federal agency is essential to protecting the American steel and manufacturing industries from unfair trade practices where countries and bad actors who have subsidized products such as steel and manufacturing are cheating our system, and countries around the world take advantage of that. The International Trade Commission protects jobs. The American workers produce the best steel and manufacturing products in the world, and I will continue to do everything possible with every fiber of my being to support the International Trade Commission and also to ensure that all workers in Northwest Indiana and our nation can compete on a level playing field. I also selected to serve on a subcommittee on energy and water development, which is responsible for providing funds for oversight of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This agency has been responsible for implementing numerous sewer, water, infrastructure, and economic development projects throughout Northwest Indiana. And we had our first hearing last week where leaders of the Army Corps of Engineers, commander of the Great Lakes and Ohio River Division, I enjoyed a discussion and thanked them for their partnership to support the economic drivers in our region, including dredging initiatives at the International Port at Burns Harbor, permitting at the Gary-Chicago Airport, one of our assets, and the efforts to protect our shoreline and clean our waterways, particularly through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I also shared with them on how my father was one of the longest-serving members of the Indiana General Assembly, and as a young child, I remember attending public forums with him and other stakeholders, including representatives from the Corps, to address the toxic pollution found in the Grand Calumet River. I am proud that the federal government, including the EPA, partnership with the Corps, has made such great progress, and I'm determined as we move forward that we can finish this work to remove over a century of industrial discharge and the benefit of countless residents, businesses, and the environment of Northwest Indiana in the next century. We also, within that committee of energy and water, is the hydrogen hub. The hydrogen hub was through the infrastructure bill. And what that means to Northwest Indiana is at BP and Whiting, it will be an $8 billion investment where they will capture carbon, so we have cleaner air and cleaner water and a better environment. And they will turn that byproduct, along with U.S. Steel and Cleveland Cliffs. They also will have a carbon capture component. This project is for the entire Midwest, so we will have cleaner air and cleaner water. But most importantly, what you need to know on why I'm fighting for that project is it will create almost 10,000 construction jobs, union trade jobs, jobs that put people to work, and also next generations within Northwest Indiana will have the opportunity to choose the trades. And so that is why I am on that subcommittee. And finally, since my time as a representative in the U.S. House through the appropriations process, I have successfully advanced more than 50 district community project funding requests for projects that improve our economy, public safety, and the quality of life for everyone in Northwest Indiana. Some examples: I secured specific funds to attract new commerce at the Gary Chicago International Airport, as well as support the recapitalize and expand the South Shore Rail Line. I also am grateful to collaborate with the Northwest Indiana stakeholders to advance regional projects that improve our quality of life, such as the construction of an all-inclusive playground and fitness park in Michigan City, the improvement of operations at the Fairhaven Rape Crisis Center in Highland, and purchase of equipment for Opportunity Enterprise in Valparaiso, which provides services for individuals with disabilities and their families. I want to thank you for allowing me to talk to you. While I am in district, I do multiple visits, and we are doing everything we can to stay connected. Again, I want to emphasize, today is about making sure that you are heard, and we have chosen some questions to be able to address them. Jamie is going to ask me those questions. But I also want you to know that we will collectively get through this, and we will find a way to be able to utilize the governing majority in a bipartisan way to make sure we're prioritizing taxpayer dollars so that fundamental programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security continue. And also, we do our very best every single day, as I did as a local official, to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. So I look forward to answering these questions, and I thank you for joining us. Jamie.
Yeah, well, thank you, Congressman, for those remarks. And as you said, over the past few days, we've been gathering questions from your constituents across Northwest Indiana. So our first question is about federal employees. Many of your constituents are concerned about the actions taken by the administration to fire federal employees. So can you explain what you were doing to protect career civil servants who are charged with implementing complex federal programs, and what are you doing to ensure that they can continue to deliver essential services to the American people?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, as a local elected official, I know what it is to do more with less. As a township trustee, I exhibited that in my works and deeds. Secondly, I want to make sure that I emphasize that federal employees are committed and dedicated to our nation's security, to Social Security, to Medicare, to our veterans, to the functioning of the IRS, to making sure that we are safe at night. And so as a member of Congress, I, of course, want to make sure that we are efficient and effective, but we're not just randomly letting people go. And I think it's important for people to understand the impact of these cuts. And so first and foremost, maybe about a week or 2 weeks ago, I was at a retirement for a police chief. An FBI agent came to me, talked to me about his Friday night. There was an incident in Chicago, which was life-threatening. His unit was on 8094, where they had to witness an individual trying to stab himself and others. They were able to apprehend that individual. And then that agent who was telling me the story received an email the following morning that said, "Tell me what 5 things you accomplished this week." And if you don't, then you won't have a job. And he was an individual that was making us safer and had been on the force for 15 years. And prior to that was a policeman. And so what this is creating is uncertainty for our law enforcement agents. And also, I want to bring it home. The Indiana Dunes is something that is near and dear to my heart. I grew up there. My children find calmness there. They like to go to the beaches to be able to lay out and make friends. The Indiana Dunes National Park, which was designated, and Congressman Visklowski worked very hard to make sure that it was the very first and only national park we have in Indiana. We receive millions of visitors. Let me repeat that. We receive millions of visitors. So we are close to Yellowstone as far as people coming to the Indiana Dunes. One of the phone calls that I received, of the thousands of phone calls that I have gotten, was from an employee from the Dunes who was a planner, an urban planner, who now is working on the infrastructure of the 5-year plan at the Indiana Dunes. There are a lot of moving parts with moving sands and putting in the infrastructure so we could manage the number of volume of people who are coming to the dunes. So she was let go because she was on probation. She was an expert in her field. She took a great deal of pride in the dunes and the quality of life that it offered her neighbors. And she was heartbroken that she couldn't use her skills and talents to make sure that we enjoy this asset. So let's take it one step farther from these random cuts. Main Street in Chesterton, Main Street in Valparaiso, Indiana. When people come to the dunes, it's an economic impact. They're going to go eat. They are going to shop in our community. They are going to be able to have a good drink and be able to even come to hotels and stay overnight. When that is in jeopardy because of random cuts to the bone that affect the infrastructure of the dunes, then it is a negative impact. And so we want to do efficient and effective government, but we want to make sure that we are doing it in a manner that protects our assets. And so I have and will always work to strengthen our work protections when it comes to collective bargaining, and most importantly, to make sure that we're looking at legislation that allows Congress to be able to decide where those cuts are.
Great. Thank you for that. And in addition to the actions taken by the administration to fire federal employees, many of your constituents also have broader concerns about the level of influence that Elon Musk has had through the new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. So what are your thoughts on Musk's actions, and what are you doing to protect transparency and the separation of powers?
Absolutely. I'm deeply concerned about Elon Musk and his access to private information, specifically when it comes to the Treasury Department's internal payment system. What I have learned as a member of Congress is that is cherished when it comes to national security. There are CIA initiatives that go through the Department of Treasury. And more importantly, one step back, there are, through the IRS and the Department of Treasury, is individual citizens, my neighbors, my friends, data about their income, data about their Social Security number. It's protected information. And so for 4 years, I was a member of the Veteran Affairs Committee, and I was chairman during 2 years of the Technology Modernization Committee. And within that committee, one of my responsibility was to make sure that we had the funding for the Veteran Affairs to protect the medical records of our veterans who are going through the VA. And what I learned while we were conducting meetings from the American Legion, from the VFW, from the DAVs, our veterans, men and women, cherish and want their information protected. Now, when we take that on the next level, we don't know who these young people are who are going in and accessing this information. We don't know how the data is going to be used in the future. Now, you have to game out these types of this type of action and say, well, what next? Will DOGE, therefore, and Elon Musk go in Medicare and look if you're receiving the right medication? So now they have access to your medical records. So we have to put a stop to that. And I'm on legislation which is called Ending the DOGE Conflict Act. and just making sure that we have a handle on what's going on. Things are moving at light speed, and we have received thousands of phone calls. I'm not being facetious. Over the last 2 weeks, we have received thousands of phone calls of people who are concerned, no matter what party you are from, what does this individual have access to, and how is he using it in the long run? I am very conservative based on the experience that I had as that chairman to make sure we protect people's private information, that we protect about the what next. And we, as your member of Congress, I will do everything I can to make sure we slow down and understand exactly what that information is being used for, and making sure that we put forth guardrails on how it can be utilized later for profit.
Well, turning to some of the spending cuts, we got several questions from constituents who believe that the federal budget is bloated and we should be doing more to reduce the national debt. So what are your thoughts on that, and what are you doing to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being used effectively?
Sure. So as a local elected official, as a township trustee, I served for 15 years. We had frozen budgets where I didn't lift the levy for almost 15 years. And we as an organization were the epitome of doing more with less. An example of that, which I think is important, was I ran a transportation system, which was a dial-a-ride or on-demand transportation system. Why I bring that up is because I found a private entity, because our dispatch was costing us too much money, and we were having a challenge of being able to fill the spots and fill the hours of dispatch, which is a difficult job. I created a partnership with Prompt Ambulance to be able to do our dispatch, which was there 24 hours a day, which was a significant investment that they made in technology that could monitor through GPS where our buses were, route us out, make it more efficient. We paid less, and we did that contract. I use that as an example just to show you that my experience as a member of Congress, I had to do that for 15 years. So ultimately, protecting the taxpayer dollars is in with my DNA. And we will continue to do that. There absolutely is fraud, waste, and abuse. And what I need to communicate is that President Trump isn't doing everything wrong. I'm on board to make sure that we're efficient and effective. Now, I don't want to slash and cut good government employees when it comes to public safety, when it comes to our quality of life. But if we can find common ground in a bipartisan way of where we can cut that, I'm on board. And we should look for that. We should have conversations and dialogues about that. And so, as the member of Congress, when it comes to our budgets and taxpayer dollars, we also have to look at the big picture. I want everyone to understand the big picture. The administration's tax cuts from the last administration are expiring this year. So they're not cutting waste and abuse and firing federal employees because of the overall goodness they're trying to do. They're trying to pay for the tax cuts that have trillions of dollars that go towards our deficit. And so the current budget process, they have to eliminate and find trillions in dollars to offset tax cuts for corporations and corporation welfare. We have to understand that in society. It's my job to communicate that. And those tax cuts to the top 1% in corporations will also add to our deficit, $2.5, $2.8 trillion per year. And so we have to ask hard questions. And there has been a rush of information that's been coming out. So of course I want efficiency, but let's make sure that people don't suffer in between that. Like I mentioned, I went to Head Start, right, in Gary, Indiana, on the floor visit. That visit was about to understand that not only is it early education and outcomes show children will do better, but the fact of the matter is you have to understand parents have reliable child care that's affordable. Today, I had the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club. They're here in Washington, D.C., from Northwest Indiana, saying that vouchers are being cut for affordable child care. And Boys and Girls Clubs are having challenges when they are being able to provide for children so their parents can go to work. So if you provide child care and you're not cutting to cut for the wealthiest tax cuts, then people can go to work and provide for themselves. So let's do things in a reasonable manner. You can cut without punishing people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to turn to foreign policy here. There has been a pretty significant shift under the current administration when it comes to the U.S. positioning on Russia and Ukraine. So where do you stand on this issue?
So I want to make it perfectly clear that I stand with Ukraine and I stand with democracy and our allies in that country. Putin is an authoritarian who went into a sovereign nation. What I want people to understand is because a great deal of the information and numbers that people are talking about is the investment that the United States have made into Ukraine. What it also has done, because I want to bring it home, is our military industrial base. So the people who make equipment for the DoD and the Army and the Navy and the Marines and our military industrial base is that we want to make perfectly clear that we are sending them old equipment and manufacturing new equipment for us. In Indiana, we have AM General that makes joint light Humvee vehicles and other weapons that are being reinstated. It is a plant that has the UAW. It's one of the oldest United Auto Workers trade unions. Most of them are veterans who continue the mission of serving our country and being able to produce what they call safe vehicles for our warfighters. And so that is one aspect of it. So on the global perspective, we are sending money and weapons to a country that is fighting for their democracy against an authoritarian invasion to regain territory. Again, to game out that theory and to think beyond today, what does that mean for Poland? What does that mean for all of Europe? That's why when President Zelensky left America and went to Europe, they were saying we have to be able to stop and unify to be able to protect democracy and be able to protect against aggression, because we have seen that before. And what we aren't doing is sending troops there and putting our troops in jeopardy. And so ultimately, I want peace, but I won't abandon what we have put ourselves into as far as protection until we have a very good peace program that puts in check the reality of Putin going into Ukraine.
Great. Well, kind of staying on the theme of international affairs, some constituents are concerned about how the tariffs in Canada, Mexico, how the tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China may affect their pocketbooks. So can you explain your position on these tariffs and what are you doing?
Sure. So I think it's important to understand that Northwest Indiana is not only a domestic manufacturer and the #1 region of steel in the nation as far as producing steel, but also Indiana is an agricultural state. So our economy is based on our farmers in Indiana and the products that they produce. So when it comes to the steel industry, and I am co-chair of the Steel Caucus, and I talked about trade when we opened up in the International Trade Commission and what that means, and me testifying before them. Ultimately, I am in favor of and agree with the current administration, President Trump, who 4 years ago, eight years ago, put in place the Section 232 tariffs that protects our steel industry against bad actors and foreign countries that subsidize their steel, meaning the government pays for it, they make a lot of it, they flood the market, and then our steel isn't competitive because they lower the price. So what happens when a foreign country drops or dumps subsidized steel in the United States and in the market, steel workers stop working. Manufacturers and contractors, and not only steel workers, but the trade men and women who go into the steel industry. So laborers, the iron workers, the bricklayers, our community, our economic community is impacted by that. So I am a supporter of that, and I agree with President Trump that that must continue. But now what we have to also talk about is I'm not for blanket tariffs because that'll affect our economy. And what I mean by that is that'll affect the farmers, that'll affect the production of cars, that'll affect the production of auto parts, and there will be, as the president said last night, disruptions, right? So what I want to do and what I have done is I am currently leading a group of individuals who are advocating for targeted reform when it comes to the tariffs. I get the perspective of the administration and what they're trying to do. They're trying to level off the percentages of tariffs so that it is a fair playing field globally. But those disruptions that were said is going to cost jobs. It's going to cost the Indiana Farm Bureau millions of dollars because of the impact it has on the ability to trade globally with soybeans, to be able to bring soybeans in. So when that happens, we want to make sure that we don't have a blanket tariffs that cause all that. And so I also agree when we're talking about tariffs, the leverage of making sure our communities are safe, because the president is using that as leverage to stop the infiltration of fentanyl in our country. And I, as a township trustee, I always mention this. My last month, we did over, I think, 11 burials of individuals who had a contact with a bad batch of heroin throughout the Chicagoland area, and we had 11 deaths in our community because of that. I have sat across the desk and looked into moms and grandparents and grandfathers' eyes who have lost loved ones. So I know the impact of that, and I want to make sure that our communities are safe. There are many ways to do that, and I believe that those governments are in line to start protecting that. But the blanket tariffs are risky because of the cost of living. That's what this is all about, right? All the elections that we went through, the tough fights that I have gotten through is creating work and wealth and lowering costs. Blanket tariffs will not do that.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. During your time in Congress, you have supported significant pieces of legislation that invest in essential transportation, energy, and manufacturing initiatives in Northwest Indiana and across the state, including the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. Given the administration's attempt to halt some of these programs and pause their funding, what are you doing to ensure that these promised taxpayer dollars continue benefiting existing projects in Northwest Indiana?
Absolutely. So first, I want to start with the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the importance of what that means to Northwest Indiana. I believe it was $8 billion of investment within the state of Indiana. And so building new roads and bridges and waterways, new bridges throughout Northwest Indiana puts people to work, first and foremost. Trade men and women who are working on these projects to make sure that our infrastructure is in place so that we can compete when it comes to commerce against other nations, against China. So what that means is the infrastructure bill also allows us to be able to make 8094 and our roads and bridges safer and more travelable. So what that means is we're able to move goods freer through our country. And when we're able to do that, then we're building jobs and our commerce is better off. So the infrastructure bill is something that created jobs. It invests in things like making sure we have clean water for our children and removing lead pipes, a program that has been utilized throughout Northwest Indiana. The infrastructure bill is laying fiber to be able to make sure that we have better broadband throughout our rural and municipalities so that students can communicate, so that students can connect. And so the infrastructure bill is a vital part of what we are doing as a member of Congress. And I want to see that come to fruition to make sure that those investments that are creating jobs and creating revenue come to full circle. I also want to talk about the CHIPS and Science Act because I think people have short-term memories. So last night, just to address one of the topics, the current administration talked about saying that the CHIPS and Science Act had no value. I want people in Northwest Indiana to understand the value of what it meant so that we don't have short-term memory loss. During COVID, our global economy shut down because the supply chain was disrupted. So Taiwan was the major manufacturer, percentage-wise, of chips that we initially invented, but basically outsourced the manufacturing of the chips. So in a bipartisan way, Senator Young, who fought for that bill from Indiana for a very long time, had the courage and the fortitude to be able to pass a bipartisan bill that was the Chips and Science Act. Let me tell you how that impacts Northwest Indiana. Chips and semiconductors are in cars, they're in our national security, they're in computers, they're in phones, they're in appliances. If you don't have, and if people can remember in the auto industry, in the Ford plant in Chicago, the Ford plant in Hegewisch, right over the first district, right? Auto workers who lived in Northwest Indiana stopped working because their production was halted because they couldn't get chips. Parking lots and parking lots of vehicles were full that were unable to get to the market because we didn't have chips and semiconductors. We passed the bill. We are moving domestic manufacturing of semiconductors to the United States. Now let's get really close to home. At Purdue University, and one of the first supporters was past Governor Mitch Daniels, who's president of Purdue University at that time, and Governor Holcomb. We all worked together to pass the Chips and Science Act. And because of the STEM education that happened at Purdue, an investor came in and built a $8 billion chips and semiconductor plant in West Lafayette. So where our children are going to school, where our grandchildren are going, an hour and 15 minutes away, we've shortened the supply chain. And big picture, if you aren't making cars or appliances, you're not producing steel. It impacts people's jobs and livelihoods, and the supply chain, right, that I talked about that was disrupted during COVID. Now we have shortened that and are making it in the United States. I am a strong advocate for the Chips and Science Act because I have seen data, real life investments in students who are now learning how to produce chips and semiconductors in the United States to expand their education, to create jobs, to create work and wealth, and to make us a more secure nation. So I will continue to advocate for those two pieces of legislation to make sure, very simply, the 14th Amendment says that Congress has the power of the purse. There are Supreme Court cases that say that. So once that is allocated through a law that has been signed by the president, a new administration, and this has been tested before, can't just come in and say, we're not spending that. It's been allocated, it's been passed, and it's an investment in our future, our national security, our students, and our manufacturing in the United States, and our workers.
Great. Well, we've also received a lot of outreach from some of our local universities and medical centers with concerns about a pause in federal funding for critical biomedical research, including for childhood cancer. So just wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about your record on that issue and what you're doing to advocate for that type of funding.
In February, I signed a letter that was a bipartisan group of members of Congress that was urging the director of the National Institute of Health to reconsider his decision to cap indirect costs and reimbursements at the 15% for all new existing research grants. So I think it's very vitally important that of the thousands of phone calls that have come in, I actually, before we came out, I was reviewing them, and there was one from a cancer patient that was at the Northwest Cancer Center that contacted me and said, basically, I can't believe I have to worry about research and trials funding being cut as I'm going through this trying disease, and this is an issue that I have to worry about. So what that means is that in the United States, what we learned is innovation saves lives. And so the research that the National Institute of Health does is it looks at cancer and causing cancer reasons, and it also helps provide trials that save people's lives when it comes to adult and children with cancer. I thought it was a champion of survivorship last night. The president acknowledged a young man at 13 years old who had beaten cancer and wanted to be in law enforcement. And he made him, I believe, a Secret Service agent. And what it reminded me of is every year Northwest Indiana Kids with Cancer, with Donna, parents and children come here and advocate for increasing in funding in a cure for childhood cancer. It has been woefully underfunded. And with the freezing of the NIH funds, that comes to a halt. And I have been an advocate. I have signed on to letters. I have gone before the Appropriations Committee to increase funding for childhood cancer. And so, again, what we have to do is find efficiencies and find a balance between making sure we're cutting government where we can, but not punishing people and not causing a lack of funding of innovation that would be short-sighted for the health of our nation.
Well, turning to our next question.
These are a lot of questions.
I know we just have a few left.
Right.
We have.
Let's get to. We'll get to the entitled programs, and then we'll
okay.
Sum it up.
All right. Sounds good. So hundreds of thousands of people in Northwest Indiana depend on programs like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and nutrition assistance, or SNAP. So what are you doing to protect those programs?
Right. So this is very topical. The current reconciliation bill that is being considered has to find a cut of $880 billion up to $1.4 trillion in Medicare and Medicaid. What I have learned is through Medicaid, the people that suffer when that gets cut are veterans, are seniors, are families of children with complex medical conditions, and hardworking families that realize that Medicaid is taking care of senior citizens who are in nursing homes, and families that have seniors in nursing homes goes through Medicare. And it also, we have to look at the big picture. When Medicare cuts or Medicaid cuts come, Indiana is a trigger state, which means very simply, in Indiana, if there is any funding, Indiana receives almost 90% of funding from the federal government for Medicaid. And ultimately, they have a trigger bill, one of 9 states, that if the funding mechanism from the federal government is reduced, then all Medicaid stops. So those are real families that are going to suffer. So access to healthcare. So what does that mean, big picture, for our economy? That means safety net hospitals such as St. Catherine's and Methodist, that I'm fighting extremely hard for to stay in existence. They're going to be overwhelmed in their emergency rooms because people are going to try and access healthcare through the old way, through the emergency rooms, paying 4 and 5 times more than what they would do if they were doing preventative methods and had this coverage. So what does that mean for private insurance? Private insurance will go up because the healthcare system is going to find a way to recover those dollars. And so we have to think big picture. Also, when you are cutting Medicare and Medicaid, you have to start thinking about access to healthcare. Fewer doctors, fewer competitors in the medical field, which means more of a monopoly, which means less competition. So you have to take all that into consideration. And regardless of what you hear, the way that the reconciliation bill is currently set up, they can only go to one place to get the $880 billion to $1.4 trillion, and that is to cut Medicaid and Medicare. We have to be aware of that. And again, I'm all about finding waste, fraud, and abuse and pulling it out. Every so often in the newspaper, you see the waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. We have to eliminate that and put guardrails and a firewall in preventing that and protect the taxpayer dollars. But we have to know the real impact and the real lives that this is going to touch. Seniors, children, veterans, people with disabilities. I was in a Walmart at 9 o'clock picking up some things for my house. An individual walked up to me from East Chicago and said, my mom has been in a wheelchair for 19 years. She just got her Medicaid waiver pulled. And he looked at me and he said, who needs it more than her? And I didn't have an answer. So we don't have to punish people, but we can find efficiencies and we can add to our healthcare system if we do it correctly.
You were definitely right to skip forward because we're just about out of time. So Congressman, is there anything else you would like to add before we close out?
Right. I think that one, I want to thank everybody. And like I said, the goal of this is to be able to, and I wish I was live in person because I can feed off the energy. There's a lot of spontaneous dialogue. So please know that in April, we will start our town halls in person so that we can interact and we can be able to connect. Secondly, one of the major questions that people are asking is how can you hold the administration accountable? Right? So we have this, all these things moving at light speed. Well, how you hold them accountable is you bring to light and you tell those stories. There's also, we have current lawsuits going through the Supreme Court, and I know the impact and I know what people are saying, but the fact of the matter is the judicial system has to be able to provide and hold the legislative branch and also the executive branch accountable to what they do. There is also other pieces of legislation that we are all working on to be able to protect Congress and the ability of our members to be able to make sure that we're protecting once we pass a bill and it's signed into law. So, you know, the common sense thing is we have to hold them accountable, you have to be able to speak up and you've got to be able to tell the stories that I have told. And I will do my very best to find legislation that continues to hold them accountable. And we will do that in a way that makes an impact. And I have to tell you, if we are always being honest, this is why elections are held, because they have their set of priorities. As I mentioned, right now, the current majority and the administration have their priorities to cut as much as they can to be able to fund their tax cuts for corporations and for the most wealthy in the country. And what we have to do is be able to understand that we have got to talk to the governing majority, as there is on appropriations, to be able to have the dialogue that people don't have to suffer in order to achieve the goals. And if we can do that together and tell the stories, and people continue to communicate with me by calling in at our office at 219-795-1844 or email us. But what I am going to do is always, as I have done consistently throughout my career, is stand up and give a voice to the voiceless. Those of you who think we can't do anything, we can. And it may not happen fast enough, but know that I am working every single day from the position as a member of Congress who's on appropriations to hold people accountable and to make sure that we advance our nation when it comes to domestic manufacturing, when it comes to our steel industry, when it comes to protecting Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security that people have paid into, and that we create a better Northwest Indiana that works, that we take care of our vulnerable, our sick, our children, our seniors, our veterans, and they're not at risk. And so collectively, if we can do that, I completely empathize with individuals who are fearful of what the future may hold, but know that there is a governing majority in Washington, D.C. that can work together to find solutions and not punish people for the greater good of the country. So with that, I just want to thank you. And again, if you need anything from my office, please contact us at 219-795-1844. I thank you for taking time. And I know that we weren't able to connect because we're not live, but I believe that it is my job to be able to pass on information. And what I also want you to know is, as a member of Congress, because there's this voice also, you want more communication. You want me to be able to tell you what we're working on, what we are doing, and how we are holding them accountable. And I will have a more open line of communication through streaming and different events and videos to make sure you know what we are doing. And together we will get through this, and as a nation, we will be stronger. So I thank you very much.